there's something that makes sense to me in terms of changing the brand voice. And in your model, you're talking about a brand voice, I think, being different when it's sort of big and public, when it's your community, the organizational, I'm not quite sure I get where that fits. Interpersonal, I get, and then even just to yourself. What I don't get is the relationship of those things in that model to the need for a different brand voice. And here's my example / question. It drives me absolutely batty when I get promotional materials from Visa about switching to Visa, when I've been a Visa customer for, I don't know, 40 years more. Or when somebody promotes something to me that I already have, or tries to sell me something that makes no sense for me to buy. Like, I liken the idea of changing, morphing, growing your brand voice more to the customer journey.
Yep, that's exactly where we're going.
Okay, but to me, the customer journey isn't fitting into this model of public, community, organizational, etc. I don't see how that relates.
Sure. So I'll bring up an example, but I'll also use yours first, right? So Visa has a series of promotional advertisements, and those advertisements are meant to automatically pre-qualify, automatically reach out, and automatically create leads for people to call in and get a credit card. I think it is a failing. And it is a failing that is caused because of a 2000s notion that brands are people. That their brand voice doesn't change because they don't think it's necessary. So in their systems, and we'll talk about this in Workshop 2, because one of the main deliverables of Workshop 2 is something called a tag and flag segmentation system, which essentially recognizes that a user is moving up and down these scopes. So on social media, Visa wants to say, switch to Visa, connect, get a credit card, 15 months of 0 APY. And then they get interested and they call into the call center and they meet a salesperson. And if we go back to that prior example of the salesperson on the truck lot, the marketing of the salesperson trying to sell a truck on the lot, right? Do you remember that example? So marketing did its job. It created a lead for someone who's interested in a 15-month 0 APY for Visa. Now they're talking to a salesperson, and the salesperson is starting to ask those increasingly close questions for the social penetration theory, from demographics down to psychographics, down to behavior, down to motivation. They're getting to know the person. Now there's this salesperson's face. They've heard their voice, they've talked to the face, and what you're saying, Debra, is now Visa turns around after you go through that process and you get to know the person behind the Visa brand. And now you're talking to the Visa brand again. And because Visa is just this organization now talking to you on this promotional email, and it's super bright and colorful, and it's saying switch to Visa, and you're like, I already have a Visa credit card, and I'm on a $0 APY, and you've already hit my set, you know I'm not in the market for a credit card for another 2 years. Just like the Ford truck, you don't want to hear about more credit cards. You want to hear about all of the incredible things that Visa is doing to deliver you rewards and also make the world better with their giant mountain of cash. It's that aspect there where Visa is not following the socio-ecological scale and allowing you to go down it. They're actually making you go up it all over again. And that's not great. Now let's say, theoretically, your experience getting a card and trying to use the card and accessing customer service absolutely sucks. Let's say Visa pulls a Comcast and you're like, I don't want this credit card anymore. It's just going to sit in my wallet. I'm disengaging. I'm done, right? How would you feel if a salesperson now contacted you and instead of saying, I want to resolve your issues, they said, hey, how about a credit card? The exact same issue is happening on a smaller scale now. The salespeople are reaching out. So by making a variable brand voice, you are setting up boundaries. What in social science we call scopes, right? Each scope of that socio-ecological scale is there. Once a person crosses a scope, either down or up, the way that you communicate has to be attached to it. And by building this different brand voice, you can now set up environments and places, what we call communities, where that brand voice is sequestered and the same. And you can set up measurement protocols on whatever platform you choose. And we'll go into this in way more detail in Workshop 2. That's what Workshop 2 is all about, right? We'll go into more detail about this. As they go up and down, you are measuring and triggering a tag and flag system. So you're flagging them as having crossed that boundary. Here's how you should talk to them. You're flagging them as having gone up or disengaged. You're flagging them and you're talking different to them. The brand has to speak to them in that level.
Where they're at, essentially, you're saying.
Exactly. And what's more is, this isn't just the customer value journey, right? We'll talk more about this in exercise 9 and also in workbook 2, being able to delineate this. Because as I said before, the purpose of community, the holy grail of community, the ultimate goal is to increase self-disclosure, convince them to connect with other people in their community where they connect. So if you want people interpersonally clashing and connecting with one another, they need to feel like they're in the same stage of the customer value journey, right? So if you can label them based upon the same stage of the customer value journey in any way, now you can start connecting like people who are in the same stages with the same interests with one another in order to create self-disclosive conversations. And therein lies your community.
Some people come into the community because they're looking for a job and they want to network with new people. Some people just moved to town and they're looking to make friends. Some are dealing with issues at work that they feel unsafe to talk about with HR and other people at work. So they're going outside of their normal network. When someone, I have plenty of people who've come to the community and really just completely disengage after a short time, 6 months, a year. And then I have some that are very active for 6 years. So would it be, is what you're saying basically that for those that came because they're looking for a job, that I have to speak with them in a different way? I'm going to just throw this out there, like more professionally, more inclusive. And then once they find a job and they feel like they no longer need lean in, somehow I have to entice them, move them, cajole them into a different aspect of the community, like maybe just making friends.
Correct.
And speak to them differently.
Yes. So,
Okay.
and again, you're right on the money, but let me share my screen again real quick. Let's look at the actual scopes of community, right? Like I said, there is a boundary or a membrane in each one of these levels, right? And you want a person to cross from a larger level into a lower level. And if they move into a higher level, you want to know that so that you can change the way that they talk. Each one of these boundaries, and again, we'll go over this in workbook 2, Every boundary has a transparency layer so that people can see into it and they can see the value or see the reward of crossing that boundary. But it also has a porosity layer. And that porosity is how easy or how difficult is it, because it might be very easy to see inside of it, but how difficult is it to actually cross the boundary? So each one of these boundaries is an onboarding process that includes a specific set of rules or restrictions, and each boundary develops its own practices, its own exercises, and its own assets. So when you bring people into an interpersonal relationship, you might require them before they move into a support group, for instance, which is highly interpersonal. They have to self-qualify themselves as identifying as a specific thing. Like, let's say they're neurodivergent, and this portion of Lean In is all about how neurodivergent people exist and cater to their mental health needs in the workplace. They have to show in some way, shape, or form that they're actually neurodivergent. In one way, that's just proclaiming the identity of saying, I have bipolar disorder, or I'm autistic. And by making sure that the people in that space represent that space, i.e., there's a porosity layer of verification, you are now creating a shared community boundary that people can cross explicitly. And
Yeah. How do you turn that into something tangible?
yeah, so again, that's what all of Workbook 2 is about. What Workbook
Okay.
and Workshop 2 is about is actually building and implementing on that theory. But all of Workbook 2 is based on the exercises that you do here in Workbook 1 in 7, 8, and 9, right? This is
sense.
us putting a plan together that is super practical. Remember, need, plan, practicality. Right now, we're in a planning stage where we are now saying, here is what we are going to do. Actually implementing and bringing this together starts with this exercise. In order for you to set up those boundaries, you need to set up the differences between the different layers of your boundary.
Part of my community is going to be a support group, let's say, using your example. And maybe I have different support groups. Maybe I have neurodivergent. I have people that have all experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. So you want to see a different brand voice for all these different situations, right? Or all these different levels of engagement that could also be, right?
Yep, that's a great term for it.